As I was saying recently to some people, the depression of the 1929 didn't affect only the United States. It spread throughout, I suppose, most of the known world, and the result was that in the United Kingdom there was a great deal of unemployment. Now, the people of Ulster, of Ireland, and most of the working areas there of England, they didn't come out of the Second World War with flags flying and trumpets blaring. They came back to the hard life that they had before the war started. It left an awful lot of people disillusioned about the future of the country. There's two countries. The coal mines in the centre of Yorkshire and Lancashire in England were there at an all-time low. The miners were very frustrated because the mine owners wouldn't pay them a decent living wage, and when the miners went on strike, it was cheaper for the mine owners to import coal from Belgium for use in the country. And there was an expression arose from that time. It was called bringing the coals to Newcastle. It meant importing coal to the very place where the coal miners were on strike. And the country itself had a very, very slow climb out of the economic state that it was in after the First World War. The very lucky people were the ones who the men had found a steady job. It didn't have to be a great job. All it had to be was a steady job that they could hold on to and pay the rent and put the food on the table. There was a lot of resentment against the government and the local authorities at that time. Because they offered no change, they offered no bright future. And most of the families in economic hurt England and also Ireland there were lucky to be able to have any sort of a Christmas, any sort of a Easter or anything at all. The children all wore hand-me-down clothes. It went through, a boy's suit could go through 3 or 4 sons as they grew up, and the girls the idea of getting a new dress would happen only perhaps at Christmas. If they were lucky, it would also happen at Easter. And the idea that things were going to get really better it never struck with people over there at all. There was no shining future that they would more or less they had after the First World War in the United States or even Australia or New Zealand. It was a very, very sad time in the United Kingdom. In the neighbourhood that I was brought up in, and I may have mentioned before that my father had a steady job working for Arthur Guinness. And because the manager of the Guinness depot in Belfast had been a colonel in the Irish Guards, so the British Army, and so he had a tendency to hire ex-servicemen who had served in the Irish Guards, and fortunately my father was one of them. So it brought in, we were one of the few families in the immediate era that the father had a steady job. During the Depression, which followed, the men were they weren't all working full-time, but they at least tried to get as much part-time work as they had. The odd thing about it, when you come from a poor neighbourhood, that you never have the idea that you're poor because you have no basis of comparison. We would sometimes wander into parts of the city which were the residential, where the well-off people lived, but that was another world that didn't exist as far as we were concerned. It was like going into a museum or an art gallery or something. You didn't just recognize the fact that people actually lived there. And you would get, when you did wander into these well-off neighbourhoods, you were usually met with a frown or a scowl from the residents who knew for sure that you did not belong there and would discourage you from returning if possible. The schools were pretty much the same way, whether the public schools or the religious schools were pretty much the same way, because you had the one or two or three kids who were well dressed, and they had but the bulk of the boys and girls there were what I always thought of as a sad bunch. They were there to learn to read and write, but at home, reading and writing was not the first priority for the children.